Hi, everybody. Welcome to our second series of the Future Tech podcast series. In this series, we're focusing on the Cyber Awareness Month and speaking to cyber professionals, owners, CTOs, CISOs, I should say, across various industry sectors, asking them a bit about their story, thoughts on emerging cyber technologies and the future of cyber in general. We'll be posting the podcast throughout October during the Awareness Month. And of course, anyone wanting to engage and find out more, we'll have details at the bottom of the podcast. So great pleasure to have Anthony Hess with me today. He's the owner and founder of Asceris. Asceris is a cyber response internet company set up very recently, actually. So the story of Anthony's background, I think, is going to be quite interesting, of where he came to and how he's ended up starting his business and where it's going. So Anthony, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to come and speak today.
Yeah, great. So let's dive straight in and tell me a bit about your story. How did you get into cyber?
Oh, I guess it's a long one. So maybe let me split it into two parts. So I tend to think of myself as both a cyber insurance as well as a cybersecurity person. The cybersecurity part of the story definitely started a lot earlier. I'd say it was always a hobby of mine as a child to play around with computers, do some basic programming. This was a very long time ago, so you couldn't quite do the things you can do today. But just over time, I'd always been really interested in computing and technology, and I was a student in aerospace engineering at the University of Arizona. And I began to learn a lot of different technologies while I was a student there, because as I said, I was really interested in it. Well, it came time to graduate. I graduated with my first degree, which was aerospace. And there was just so many opportunities at that time. It was a dot-com boom. And so I ended up getting a job at that point as a Unix system administrator. And that is really what directly led me into sort of the cybersecurity world, because we were getting hacked all the time. We were right on the internet. There was no firewall. There was no security team. This was only a year or two after open mail relays were a normal thing. So you were still often dealing with spam being sent through your servers, people sort of playing around and compromising them for various purposes. And so that was really the beginning for me, was really as a system administrator, and having security as such a core part of my role, and learning all around, how to, from a technical perspective at least, how to do so many of these things. Implementing encryption, as I said, responding to getting hacked, responding to incidents, access control, all these types of things were really a core part of my role there. The insurance story is probably a little newer. About 6.5 years ago, I stumbled into, I was running a pen testing team at KPMG UK, and which I really enjoyed. I really liked the team. I have an affinity for technical people, and I was having a lot of fun doing that. Well, one of the opportunities we had was to work with AIG, which is certainly one of, if not the largest cyber insurer in the world, at least at that time. And I looked at the opportunity and it said AIG Cyber Edge, cyber insurance. And I thought, well, what is that? That seems like a crazy idea. You mean people actually get an insurance policy against getting hacked? I'd never heard of it before. So I really dived into it and learned all about it, built a service all around the world, in particular focus on Europe. So we supported all the different, major European languages, 1 hour response time, all those sorts of things. Well, that, getting into that led me into about 2 years later working for an insurance company. So I went to go work for CFC Underwriting, which was one of the leading cyber insurance companies. Very innovative, very different ways of thinking of things, and built an internal cyber claims / incident response function. I spent a few years there, and that's really, I think, where I learned the most about insurance and what insurance companies really could use, both in terms of preventing incidents. Now, remember, it's very different for them when it comes to preventing incidents, because they're worried about an entire book of business. So the way they're going to look at it is quite different than how an individual security professional in a company is going to look at it, as well as just learning, the broader claims impacts if you have a cyber incident, how are all the different ways you can handle that incident to, have a really good outcome, and, minimize the damage to the business, minimize the sort of economic issues you run into, which in the end results in an insurance payout. So, when I went to kind of take these things together and found Asceris, that was really my mindset. Was I want to combine my technical background and my technical understanding and my interest in that, my interest in automation and being really effective at using data to make better decisions around cyber incidents. And also, using my insurance knowledge. And so think like an insurance person, think like someone that understands the broader claims impacts, and combine them together and go to the market. So, one of the ways I tend to describe Asceris is we are an incident response company. If you come from the incident response world, you would look at us and say, yep, looks like an incident response company. Looks like you do incident response, and that is true. But if you look at us from the insurance world, you could see us a little differently. Perhaps, we're a claim support vendor or a technical claim support vendor. We very much exist, kind of in between those two worlds, which is the insurance and the cybersecurity. So that's kind of my background. That's, what led me to found Asceris and kind of combine these things together from my previous history.
Yeah, and that's a great story on how you've made it evolve through time and spotted the opportunities. And like you say, looking at cyber insurance as originally as an unknown, what was it, through to then embracing it and seeing it as such a future powerhouse, I guess, or a future market that's probably pretty essential across every industry sector, I would have thought, especially with the world changing at a million miles an hour.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, cyber insurance is really interesting, especially as it's evolved over time. When it started, it was very US focused. It's probably been around 20 years now. 1999, 2000 was when the first cyber policy started to hit the market. And the thought process back then was, we're going to protect people against lawsuits being caused by them being attacked, them being compromised, and then doing something to someone else. And then, you started to see data breach laws come into play, and the policy started to evolve to support those, but they were still always very US focused. And so you saw really limited, utility and limited penetration outside the US. I think the last few years it's really shifted. However, I think these cyber insurance policies, when they're actually cyber insurance, are very, very useful for dealing with the cost of ransoms, the cost of business interruption, the sort of providing the services to help mitigate these things. So they'll provide the legal services, they'll provide the incident response services, in addition to sort of the traditional data breach focused policies, which will cover, if you see a lawsuit, they would cover if, the notification costs in different areas that might have requirements for notification. They might cover the parts of the data breach investigation to figure out what data had been impacted. All those sorts of things are traditional, but as it's moving into covering more and more different types of cyber that we see, it's more like a variant of a cybercrime policy in a sense. And so I think it's really fascinating, and I love to see just over the last 6 years how the policies have evolved and how they cover so many more things than they used to. I think they really provide a lot of value to people. I'm a big proponent of the insurance.
Yeah, fantastic. So that nicely moves on to then the second part of the podcast, which is your thoughts on emerging cyber technology. So what excites you when you're looking at the industry as a whole?
Yeah, so I guess it ties back a bit into what we're doing at Asceris. I think a lot of people have a great deal of fear of automation, and I don't really know what it's going to do. And I have a lot of sympathy for those individuals who maybe don't have a tremendous amount of skill or variability in the types of things they could do, and they're being automated out of a job. I think that is a real long-term challenge, and I hope governments take it seriously. I think when it comes to what we do, however, it actually it frees us up to do more interesting things. I in particular, I've always been really bad at doing things that I don't like doing. There's I've never been particularly disciplined in that way. I just want to do the things I want to do. And I think what automation allows us to do is to focus more on the hard problems and more on the insight that you can bring, rather than just kind of grinding through, step by step. Okay, let's do this again. Let's do this again. I saw this when I worked in the security operations center, where you would essentially spend all day, every day, doing exactly the same 5 things. Click, 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 click. Or when I worked in technical support while I was in university, doing phone support for Windows, it was always the exact same problem. People thought I was reading off a script because I was so bored. I would just sit online and just chat with people all day. And I wasn't even listening, because I knew exactly what the problem was, because 95% of the time was exactly the same thing. So you didn't even need to think. I think, to me, the excitement is that's going away. You can start to just, all right, this is a really simple problem. Make the computer solve it. Don't sit there and just over and over and over and over again. So to me, that's probably the really most exciting thing, is just the increasing presence of automation in cyber. I think, if I look at things more broadly, if I look at more of the emerging technology question rather than the cybersecurity question, I think there's never been a better time to be alive in terms of technology. There's certainly a lot of concerns out there, with things like Facebook and the kinds of damage that, those platforms can cause, or, Google and Facebook with the amount of pervasive tracking they're doing. Definitely big concerns. And those are things that did not exist to this extent before. But I think if you put those aside a bit, and hopefully those will be dealt with, I think there are legal regulatory issues that need to be handled there. If you look at it, I'm amazed by technology. I was just having a conversation with someone the other day, and we think back to what computing was like in the 80s, or when we got started. I'm pretty certain that there's quite a bit more CPU power in my watch than there is in the computers I learned how to program on.
Yeah.
And it's close to you. It's not just the computers have gotten faster, they've gotten more personal. And that's continuing a long trend over the last 50 years. It used to be the big computer in a room, and now the computer's in your headphones tracking the direction of your head, or it's in your watch, tracking your heart rate and how much exercise you're getting. So I think we've never been in a more exciting time in terms of the personalization of technology, the consumerization of enterprise technology. So basically, the enterprise technology is becoming much more personal. It's becoming a lot more like what you would buy for your home. Yeah. And that really has great benefits, because you're actually getting to choose your technology. You're getting to use technology in the workplace that's useful, easy to use, is pleasant, as opposed to the way systems were 15, 20 years ago. So speaking more broadly, I think it's personalization and consumerization are the 2 most exciting things for me from a broader technology perspective.
And that's such a lovely viewpoint on it, because it's, I speak to a lot of CTOs and CISOs and people in the tech world, and everyone is on the same page that technology is it's never been more exciting in regards to how rapidly it's evolving. But to look at it from a personalization point of view is really interesting, because you're right. The mobile phone now is the third hand for most people, and you almost feel lost without it, and how that's advanced and how it's become just second nature.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly it can come with downsides, and I think we're very focused on those, in part because of human nature to focus on the problem and try to solve it. And I do think those problems will be solved, and there'll be new ones. But I think it's fascinating when you walk around and you see everybody so connected nowadays, and so much information's available to us. It's really, if you look back 20 years, you almost forget just how much it's changed, because it's happened incrementally over the years. But if you start to think back through your day to day, it's amazing how much things have changed in 20 years.
Yeah. And I guess that leads me nicely on to the sort of last point of thinking about the future, because as we talked of technology evolving at the rate it is, to me, it feels like there's never been more an important time to look at cybersecurity and the associated cyber insurance and all the other associated offshoots. But where do you see it moving to in terms of an industry as a specific? Is cybersecurity
Yeah.
going to become embedded in every single household or company?
I think cybersecurity needs to be embedded everywhere. I think, as we use technology more and more, as it becomes more personal to us, the negative impact becomes greater. You look back 20 years, you had these giant malware, code red and things of that nature, sort of spreading around the world, taking massive amounts of systems offline. We didn't leave work, we just kept chugging along, whereas nowadays, if you had that level of system outage, it would be devastating economically, just because of how dependent we are on these systems. So I think cybersecurity is only becoming more pervasive, but it creates a gap. It creates a gap in terms of being able to deploy technology or train people fast enough to meet the increasing demand for cybersecurity. I think where will it be? Where will it sit? Will it sit in companies or homes? I think it'll be everywhere. I think there'll be lots of different delivery models, and it really depends on, the type of company. I think one, just as an example, I won't go into every example of how that could be, but if you look at virtual CISO services, often small companies don't have, a capability to handle their own cybersecurity because they just don't have someone with enough time to be dedicated to sort of look at this or kind of spend their focus on, all day, every day doing security, because then they wouldn't get their day job done. Well, now you have virtual CISOs being delivered in a variety of different ways. The most clever companies are automating pieces of this and delivering some of this capability in online platforms. I think, it's great because that knowledge, that little slice of knowledge, can be delivered into all these different companies who before would not have had access to it and wouldn't have been able to get access to it. So, I think the market is responding. There's always going to be a lag, but cybersecurity will need to be everywhere, and I think there's a great future for it.
Yeah. Well, what a great way to summarize as well, because there's so much advancement, and that's really interesting about the virtual CISO and how companies, whether you're starting out as a startup all the way through to a PLC, you should be able to embrace a level of cybersecurity with the advancements of the industry, I guess. So,
yeah.
Great. Well, look, Anthony, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. And to everyone listening, that is another episode of our Future Tech podcast series with me, Charlie Sell, the Group MD at Arrows Group. As we mentioned, it will be posted on the Spotify channel and our YouTube channel. And for anyone who wants to find out more or get in touch, there'll be a link on LinkedIn, and please follow it through to the podcast. So one more time, Anthony, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure being here.
Great. And that's another episode. Thank you, everybody.